I understand you want me to expand each part of the story into approximately 1,400 words each, using simple English, a natural tone, and ensuring the content is engaging and suitable for YouTube. I'll avoid using the specific names you mentioned and keep the content human-centric. Let me expand each part for you. The rain poured down hard that evening as James stood under the small shelter of the bus stop. His worn leather bag hung from his shoulder, heavy with ungraded history papers. After a long day of teaching teenagers about the Civil War, all he wanted was to get home, make a cup of tea, and sink into his couch. The bus was running late as usual, and the small crowd at the stop had grown restless. James noticed her immediately when she rushed to the stop. She stood out, not just because of her expensive-looking clothes that were now completely soaked, but because of the panic on her face as she dug through her designer purse. Her dark hair was plastered to her face from the rain, and despite her clearly expensive outfit, she looked vulnerable and upset. Come on," she muttered, emptying the contents of her purse onto the small bench at the bus stop. James watched for another moment before stepping closer. "Everything okay?" he asked. The woman looked up, her brown eyes wide with frustration. "I can't find my wallet. I had it at the meeting, but now." She sighed deeply. "And my phone's dead. Perfect timing." Without thinking twice, James reached into his pocket and pulled out enough money for the bus fare. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "Take this." She stared at the money, then at him. "I couldn't." "Please," James insisted with a smile. "We've all been there. You can pay it forward someday." After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the money with a grateful nod. "Thank you. Really. I'm Alex, by the way." "James," he replied, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Alex." The bus finally arrived, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. They boarded together, finding seats near the back. James expected the conversation to end there, but to his surprise, Alex continued talking. "So what do you do, James?" she asked, wringing water from the edge of her silk blouse. "I teach history at Westside High," he answered. 10th and 11th grade. Today was all about the Civil War, which means 28 papers to grade tonight. He patted his bag with a tired smile. "A teacher," she said, sounding genuinely interested. "That must be rewarding." James laughed. "On good days, absolutely. On days when nobody's done the reading and someone sets off the fire alarm during a test. Less so." He shrugged. "But honestly, I love it. Seeing a kid finally understand something they've been struggling with. There's nothing like it." As the bus rumbled through the rain-slicked streets, James found himself telling this stranger about his students, about the community garden he'd helped start behind the school, about his dream to create a scholarship program for kids who couldn't afford college. There was something easy about talking to Alex. She listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely impressed by things he took for granted. "What about you?" he finally asked. "What do you do?" A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. "I work in tech," she said after a moment. "Consulting mostly." "Sounds fancy," James said with a smile. "Not as important as shaping young minds," she replied, her eyes warm. The bus jolted to a stop, and Alex looked out the window. "This is me," she said, gathering her things. Before standing, she paused and turned to James. "Thank you again for the bus fare and the conversation. It's been refreshing." James waved off her thanks. "Anytime. Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe you will," she answered with a smile that lit up her entire face. As Alex stepped off the bus into the rain, James couldn't help but watch her go. There had been something special about their conversation, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He shook his head and smiled to himself. A random meeting on a rainy day. Nothing more. By tomorrow, they'd both have forgotten about it, but Alexandra Chen didn't forget. As she walked the 2 blocks to where her driver waited in a discreet black car, she found herself replaying the conversation in her mind. When she slid into the back seat, her assistant immediately handed her a charged phone and a spare wallet. "Ms. Chen, the board has been trying to reach you for the past hour. They're concerned about—" "Tell them we'll discuss it tomorrow." Alexandra interrupted, her mind still on the kind teacher who'd helped a stranger without a second thought. Her assistant looked surprised. But the merger can wait until morning, Alexandra finished firmly. She gazed out the window as the car pulled away from the curb, watching the bus continue down the street. For the first time in years, she'd had a conversation that didn't revolve around stock prices, market shares, or corporate takeovers. Just a simple, honest talk with someone who had no idea who she was. Alexandra Chen, CEO of Chen Tech Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, found herself smiling. In the 20 minutes on that bus, she'd felt more like herself than she had in the past 5 years of leading her company. The next day, Alexandra sat in her corner office on the 52nd floor, overlooking the city. The morning had been filled with meetings about the upcoming merger, calls with investors, and an emergency session with her PR team about a minor scandal involving one of their products. But throughout it all, her mind kept drifting back to James, the history teacher. Ms. Chen? Her assistant's voice brought her back to the present. Your 1 o'clock is here. Alexandra nodded, closing the file on her desk. As her next appointment entered, she made her decision. She would find James again. Not as Alexandra Chen, CEO and tech tycoon worth billions, but as Alex, the woman who'd lost her wallet in the rain. That evening, she dismissed her driver and took the same bus route, hoping to run into James again. When he didn't appear, she felt a surprising pang of disappointment. For the next 2 days, she repeated the experiment, adjusting her schedule and ignoring her assistant's concerned looks. On the third day, Alexandra had nearly given up hope when she spotted him at the same bus stop, this time under clear skies. Her heart beat faster as she approached, suddenly nervous in a way board meetings and press conferences never made her feel. "Fancy meeting you here," she said, stopping beside him. James turned, surprise and then recognition lighting up his face. "Alex," he exclaimed. "No lost wallet today, I hope?" She laughed, the sound natural and unguarded. "No, I'm fully prepared today. In fact," she reached into her purse. "I believe I owe you bus fare." As she held out the money, their fingers brushed, and Alexandra felt a spark that had nothing to do with static electricity. James smiled, and something warm bloomed in her chest. She'd built an empire, closed million-dollar deals, and changed the face of modern technology. But standing at a simple bus stop with a high school history teacher, Alexandra Chen felt like she'd discovered something far more valuable than anything money could buy. She just had to make sure he never found out who she really was. For the next few days, Alexandra couldn't focus on anything but the kind-hearted teacher who'd helped her. During board meetings, her mind drifted to his warm smile. While reviewing quarterly reports, she wondered what his classroom looked like. It wasn't like her to be so distracted, especially with the biggest merger in the company's history just weeks away. "Are you feeling all right?" her CFO asked, after she'd missed a question for the third time that morning. "Just tired," Alexandra replied, straightening in her chair. "Continue with the presentation." But tiredness wasn't the issue. She was obsessed with finding James again. Their second brief meeting at the bus stop had ended too quickly when her work phone had rung with an emergency she couldn't ignore. She'd left abruptly, seeing the disappointment in his eyes. Back in her office, Alexandra paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Finding one teacher in a city of millions shouldn't be hard for someone with her resources. She just needed to be careful about it. "Lisa," she called to her assistant through the intercom. "Can you come in here, please?" Lisa appeared promptly, tablet in hand. "Yes, Ms. Chen?" "I need information on a local high school teacher named James. He teaches history at..." Alexandra paused, trying to remember the name he'd mentioned. "Westside High, I believe." Lisa raised an eyebrow but made a note. "Any particular reason?" "It's for our education initiative," Alexandra said smoothly. "The one we've been planning to launch next quarter. I met him briefly and was impressed by his ideas. I think he could provide valuable input." Lisa nodded, though Alexandra could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "I'll have the information for you by this afternoon." True to her word, Lisa returned 3 hours later with a file. James Rivera, history teacher at Westside High for 7 years. Graduated with honors from State University. turned down several higher-paying positions to work in a school with predominantly lower-income students. She handed over the file. He's won the district's Teacher of the Year award twice and runs an after-school program helping students prepare for college. Alexandra took the file, her heart beating faster as she looked at his staff photo. Same kind eyes, same genuine smile. Should I arrange a meeting through official channels? Lisa asked. No, Alexandra said quickly. I'll handle this personally. It's delicate. After Lisa left, Alexandra studied everything in the file. James wasn't just a good teacher. He was exceptional. Student testimonials praised his ability to make history relevant and exciting. Fellow teachers mentioned his dedication to helping struggling students. There was even a newspaper clipping about a food drive he'd organized during the pandemic. The next day, Alexandra did something she hadn't done in years. She called in sick to work. Instead of her usual designer outfit, she put on jeans and a simple blouse, tied her hair back in a ponytail, and left her penthouse apartment via the service elevator to avoid her building's doorman. She took a taxi to West Side High, arriving just as school was letting out. Students poured from the building, loud and energetic in their freedom. Alexandra felt oddly nervous as she approached the main entrance, stopping a passing student to ask for directions to Mr. Rivera's classroom. The teenager pointed down a hallway. Room 108, but he's probably still in there. He always stays late on Thursdays for history club. Alexandra thanked him and made her way through the bustling school. The hallways were lined with student artwork and motivational posters, so different from the sleek minimalist corridors of Chentec's headquarters. Room 108 had the door propped open. Alexandra peered in to see James sitting on the edge of his desk, engaged in an animated discussion with a small group of students. He was using his hands expressively as he talked about something that had the teenagers completely captivated. So the general says to Lincoln, "I hear you want to borrow my army." And Lincoln just stares him down and says, "No, General. It's my army. I'm just allowing you to command it." James delivered the punchline with such perfect timing that the students erupted in laughter. Alexandra couldn't help but smile. She waited until the students began packing up before gently knocking on the door frame. James looked up, and his expression shifted from professional to surprised to delighted in the span of seconds. "Alex," he said, standing up straighter. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, suddenly feeling awkward. What was she doing here? This wasn't like her at all. "Not at all," James replied, turning to his students. "That's it for today, everyone. Remember, papers are due Monday." As the students filed out, several of them glanced curiously at Alexandra. Once they were alone, James crossed the room to her. "This is unexpected," he said, his tone warm. "How did you find me?" Alexandra had prepared for this question. "You mentioned West Side High when we met on the bus," she explained. "I was in the neighborhood for a meeting and thought I'd take a chance to see if you were around." The lie came easily, though it felt wrong when directed at someone as honest as James. "Well, I'm glad you did," he said, gesturing around the classroom. "Welcome to my world. Not quite as glamorous as tech consulting, I imagine." Alexandra looked around at the history posters, the bookshelves stuffed with worn volumes, the inspirational quotes written on the whiteboard. "It has character," she said honestly. "It feels alive," James laughed. "That's one way to put it." Chaotic might be another. He began gathering papers from his desk. "I was just about to grab coffee before tackling these essays. Would you like to join me? There's a decent place just down the street." The coffee shop was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. They found a quiet corner table, and James insisted on paying for their drinks, waving away her protests. "You covered my bus fare," he reminded her. "Let me get the coffee." As they sat across from each other, Alexandra found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did. There were no agendas here, no hidden motives, no strategic positioning, just conversation. "So," James said after they'd settled in, "what brings you to this part of town? Besides stalking high school teachers, that is." His eyes crinkled with humor. Alexandra smiled. "Would you believe me if I said I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation on the bus?" The truth slipped out before she could censor it. James looked surprised, then pleased. "Actually, yes, because I've been thinking about it too." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "There was something about talking to you that was just easy, like we'd known each other for years." "Exactly," Alexandra agreed, feeling a rush of relief that he'd felt it too. I don't have many conversations like that in my world. And what world is that? James asked, his expression curious. You said tech consulting, but that's pretty vague. Alexandra tensed slightly. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet, maybe not ever. It's complicated, she said evasively. Lots of meetings, corporate politics, the usual. Sounds thrilling, James teased. About as thrilling as grading papers on the Civil War, she countered. He laughed. Touché. For the next hour, they talked about everything and nothing. Favorite books, childhood memories, dream vacations. James told her about growing up in a small town, about his parents who'd worked multiple jobs to put him through college, about his passion for making history accessible to kids who thought it was boring. History isn't just dates and dead people, he explained, his eyes lighting up. It's stories, messy, complicated human stories. If kids can see that, they can see themselves in it. Alexandra found herself captivated by his passion. In her world, passion was usually directed at profit margins and market expansion. James's enthusiasm for teaching, for making a difference in his students' lives, was refreshingly pure. When they finally parted ways, exchanging phone numbers just in case, Alexandra felt lighter than she had in years. As her driver picked her up a few blocks away, she'd texted him discreetly while in the bathroom. She realized she was smiling. Good meeting, Ms. Chen, her driver asked, catching her expression in the rearview mirror. Very good, she replied, looking out the window as they passed West Side High. Very good indeed. That night, lying in her king-sized bed in her penthouse apartment, Alexandra scrolled through her phone to the new contact, James Rivera. Her finger hovered over the message icon. Would it be too forward to text him already? Would it seem desperate? She laughed at herself. Alexandra Chen, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, was worrying about texting a high school teacher. What was happening to her? Before she could overthink it further, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. From James. Thanks for the surprise visit today. Made grading these papers a lot more bearable, knowing there are interesting people out there beyond essays on Gettysburg. Coffee again sometime? Alexandra hugged the phone to her chest, feeling like a teenager again. This was dangerous territory. She was lying to him about who she was. Eventually, he would find out. But for now, for just a little while, she wanted to be just Alex, the woman who'd lost her wallet in the rain, not Alexandra Chen, the CEO whose face appeared in business magazines. She texted back, definitely. Let me know when. As she drifted off to sleep, Alexandra wondered how long she could keep up the charade and what would happen when it inevitably fell apart. Typing text markdown. Over the next few weeks, Alexandra created a careful double life. By day, she was Alexandra Chen, the powerhouse CEO steering Chen Tech through its biggest merger yet. By evening, she was just Alex, the tech consultant who kept running into James at coffee shops, bookstores, and yes, occasionally the same bus stop where they'd first met. She became an expert at quick changes, swapping power suits for casual clothes, taking out her contact lenses for her rarely worn glasses, pulling her hair into a simple ponytail. Her security detail and driver were sworn to secrecy and instructed to keep their distance whenever she met with the teacher, as they called him. The board meeting ran late again? James asked one evening as she hurried to meet him at a small Italian restaurant, 20 minutes behind schedule. Sorry, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Client emergency. You know how it is? James smiled, already pouring her a glass of water. Actually, I don't. My emergencies usually involve someone putting the wrong answer on a test and then arguing about it for half an hour. Alexandra laughed, relaxing into their easy rapport. This was what she craved, these moments of normalcy, of being valued for her conversation rather than her company stock. So, James said after they'd ordered, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Alexandra tensed slightly. Had he discovered who she really was? The school's having this staff dinner thing next Friday, he continued, looking a bit nervous. It's nothing fancy. Potluck at my place since I have the biggest apartment. Would you want to come? As my guest? Relief flooded her, followed immediately by panic. Going to his apartment? Meeting his colleagues? This was getting complicated. You don't have to, James added quickly, misinterpreting her hesitation. It's probably boring compared to your tech world events. No, Alexandra said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I'd love to come, really. His face lit up. Great. Just bring whatever dish you want, or wine. Wine's always good with teachers. I can handle wine, Alexandra said with a smile, thinking of the $1,000 bottles in her climate-controlled wine room at home. The night of the staff dinner arrived, and Alexandra found herself standing outside James's apartment building in Brooklyn, holding 2 bottles of wine she'd carefully selected to be good, but not suspiciously expensive. She'd spent an absurd amount of time choosing her outfit, casual enough not to stand out, but still put together. Her driver had dropped her off 3 blocks away, and she'd insisted on coming alone despite her security team's protests. James's building had no doorman, just a simple buzzer system. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, a walk-up. By the time she reached his door, Alexandra could hear music and laughter from inside. She took a deep breath and knocked. James opened the door, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her to cancel. "Of course I came," she replied, handing him the wine. "I promised, didn't I?" He ushered her inside, where about 15 people were scattered around a cozy living room and small open kitchen. The apartment was nothing like her penthouse. It was modest in size, filled with bookshelves, vintage posters, and mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. It felt lived in, warm, real. "Everyone," James announced. "This is Alex. Alex, this is everyone." There was a chorus of hellos as James began introducing her to his colleagues. The English teacher with silver-streaked hair who made amazing lasagna. The young math teacher who was also a part-time DJ. The school librarian who kept correcting everyone's grammar after her 3rd glass of wine. They were curious about her, of course. What did she do? How had she met James? But they accepted James's vague explanation about meeting on the bus without much question. More interested in sharing school gossip and complaining about the new standardized testing requirements. Alexandra found herself relaxing as the evening progressed. These people had no agenda, no hidden motives. They laughed easily, argued passionately about books and movies, and genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company. When was the last time she'd been at a gathering that wasn't networking in disguise? "So what do you think?" James asked quietly, joining her on the small balcony where she'd stepped out for a moment of fresh air. "Not too boring?" "Not at all," she said honestly. "Your friends are wonderful." "They're good people," he agreed, leaning against the railing beside her. Their shoulders touched, sending a small thrill through her. They care about what they do. Makes all the difference. "Yes," she murmured, thinking about her own work, her own passion that had somehow gotten buried under quarterly reports and shareholder expectations. "It does." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. Then James turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Alex, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. "What is it?" "These past few weeks have been—" He paused, searching for words. "I wasn't expecting you. Any of this. I wasn't looking for—" He gestured between them. "Neither was I," she admitted softly. "But I'm glad it happened," he continued, his voice low and warm. "I'm really glad I gave you that bus money." Alexandra laughed, the tension breaking. "Best investment ever, right?" "Definitely," he said, and then he was leaning in, and she was meeting him halfway, and they were kissing under the Brooklyn stars with the sounds of laughter floating out from the apartment behind them. It was perfect. And terrifying, because with every passing day, with every deeper connection, the lie between them grew larger. After the dinner party, their relationship shifted into something more defined. They were dating, officially. Weekend excursions to museums, weeknight dinners when she could get away from work, long walks through city parks where Alexandra constantly scanned for photographers or anyone who might recognize her. James introduced her to his world, community gardens, local bookstores where the owners knew him by name, the diner where he graded papers every Thursday, the small theater that showed classic movies on Sunday afternoons. "Next week is Casablanca," he told her as they walked hand in hand through Washington Square Park. "We should go." "I've never seen it," Alexandra admitted. James stopped walking and stared at her in mock horror. "You've never seen Casablanca? That's it, relationship over." She laughed and squeezed his hand. "Give me a chance to redeem myself." Well, he pretended to consider. I suppose we could watch it together. Your cultural education is my responsibility now. As they continued walking, Alexandra felt a pang of guilt. She was showing James so little of her actual life, while he was sharing everything with her. She'd created this persona of Alex the tech consultant, who worked long hours but otherwise lived a relatively normal life. The truth couldn't have been more different. That night in her penthouse, Alexandra made a decision. She couldn't tell James who she really was, not yet, but she could share more of herself. The real self that existed beneath the CEO title. The next time they met, she brought her old film camera, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago when work became all-consuming. You never mentioned you were into photography, James said, examining the vintage camera with interest. There's a lot you don't know about me, she replied, meaning it more literally than he could guess. Well, I want to know everything, he said, pulling her close for a kiss. The words sent both warmth and dread through her. Everything. Even the fact that she'd been lying to him since they met. As weeks turned into months, Alexandra found herself living for the moments with James. Their relationship deepened, even as the merger at Chentech reached a critical phase, demanding more and more of her time. Another late meeting. James asked when she had to cancel their plans for the third time in 2 weeks. I'm sorry, she said, and she truly was. This project is it's important. I get it, he said, though she could hear the disappointment in his voice. Rain check? Definitely, she promised. The next day, to make it up to him, she arranged to leave work early, a nearly unheard-of event that had her assistant staring in disbelief. She surprised James at school, waiting outside his classroom as the final bell rang. His face when he saw her was worth every rescheduled meeting. What are you doing here? Kidnapping you, she announced. We're going on an adventure. The adventure was simple, a ferry ride to Staten Island and back, watching the sunset over the city skyline. But the joy of it was in being together, uninterrupted by work calls or obligations. As they stood at the railing, the wind whipping Alexandra's hair around her face, James wrapped his arms around her from behind. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly into her ear. I thought you should know. Alexandra turned in his arms to face him, her heart pounding. In that moment, the lie between them seemed both enormous and insignificant compared to the truth of how she felt. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered back. And it was true. Truer than anything in her carefully constructed life. That night, they made love for the first time in his Brooklyn apartment, with its creaky floors and thin walls and absolutely no security team waiting discreetly outside. Afterward, lying in his arms, Alexandra felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Tell me something about you that nobody else knows, James murmured into her hair. Alexandra thought for a moment. I'm afraid of elevators, she said finally. It was true. A childhood incident had left her with a lingering fear, despite the fact that she worked in a skyscraper and used elevators multiple times daily. Really? How do you manage in all those tall office buildings? I fake it, she said simply. Nobody can tell I'm terrified. He kissed the top of her head. You don't have to fake anything with me, you know. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on her. If only he knew how much she was faking. But the feeling between them, that was real. The most real thing she'd felt in years. As dawn broke, Alexandra slipped out of bed to return to her world of board meetings and billion-dollar decisions. Looking at James's peaceful sleeping face, she wondered how much longer she could keep these two worlds separate before they inevitably collided. ID Story Part 4, Type and Text Markdown. The headline caught James's eye as he waited to pay for his coffee. Tech giant Chentech finalizes historic merger. It wasn't the headline itself that made him pause. He had only a passing interest in business news, but rather the photograph below it. A woman in a sharp suit stood at a podium, her expression confident and commanding. A woman who looked exactly like Alex. James squinted at the small print beneath the photo. Alexandra Chen, CEO of Chentech Industries, announces the completion of the company's merger with GlobalSoft, creating the largest tech conglomerate in the country. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, splashing hot liquid across the convenience store floor. The cashier called out in concern, but James barely heard him. He was too busy staring at the face he'd woken up next to just yesterday morning. The face of a woman who had told him she was a mid-level tech consultant named Alex. Sir, are you okay? The cashier's voice finally broke through. Fine, James managed, apologizing for the spill and mechanically paying for a new coffee. He bought the magazine too, tucking it under his arm as he left the store. Outside, he sat on a nearby bench and opened the magazine to the full article. There was no mistake. The woman in the photos, there were several more inside, was definitely his Alex. Except she wasn't Alex at all. She was Alexandra Chen, 34-year-old CEO of one of the most valuable companies in the world, with an estimated personal worth of billions. The article described her as brilliant but notoriously private, a visionary in the tech space, and one of the most powerful women in business. It mentioned her Stanford education, her meteoric rise through Silicon Valley, and her reputation for being as ruthless as she is innovative. None of this matched the woman James had fallen in love with over the past few months. His Alex was thoughtful and down-to-earth, interested in photography and classic movies, who got excited about finding small bookstores and trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants. His phone buzzed with a text. From her, free for dinner tonight? That new Thai place we talked about? James stared at the message, anger and confusion building inside him. She was still keeping up the pretense even now. Had any of it been real, or was he just some kind of social experiment for a bored billionaire? He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he spent the day in a fog, teaching his classes on autopilot while his mind raced. By the time the final bell rang, he'd made a decision. He texted back, "My place instead. We need to talk." Her response came quickly. "Sounds serious." "Everything okay? Just meet me there at 7, he wrote, unable to maintain their usual warm banter. He spent the next few hours pacing his apartment, the magazine open on his coffee table. When the buzzer rang at exactly 7 o'clock, James took a deep breath before pressing the button to let her in. She arrived at his door looking like the Alex he knew. Casual clothes, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple style. Her smile faltered when she saw his expression. "James, what's wrong?" He stepped aside to let her in without returning her greeting. Once she was inside, he picked up the magazine and held it out to her, open to her photograph. "Interesting article," he said flatly. "You should read it. It's about this amazing CEO named Alexandra Chen. Looks just like you, doesn't she?" The color drained from her face as she stared at the magazine. "James, I can explain." "Can you?" He cut her off, his voice tight with hurt. "Because I've been trying to understand it all day. Why would someone like you—" He gestured to the magazine. "Pretend to be someone else to be with someone like me? Was I some kind of project? Research on how the other half lives?" "No," she exclaimed, reaching for him. He stepped back and she let her hand fall. "It wasn't like that at all." "Then what was it like?" he demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me from the moment we met." Alexandra sank onto his couch, her shoulders slumping. "I have been," she admitted quietly. "But not about everything. Not about how I feel. Why?" The single word contained all his confusion and pain. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "That first day on the bus, you had no idea who I was. Do you know how rare that is for me? You helped me because I was just a person who needed help, not because I was Alexandra Chen." She took a shaky breath, and when we talked, it was real conversation. Not someone trying to impress me or get something from me or sell me something, just connection. James remained standing, arms crossed. "So you decided to keep pretending?" "I didn't plan to," she insisted. "I thought I'd never see you again. But then I couldn't stop thinking about you, about our conversation, and I wanted more of that, more of being seen as a person, not a position or a bank account. So you stalked me at my school and built an entire relationship on a lie," he said bluntly. Alexandra flinched at his words. "When you put it that way, how else should I put it?" She had no answer for that. They sat in strained silence for a long moment. "I was going to tell you," she finally said. "I just couldn't figure out how or when. At first it didn't seem important because I didn't think we'd see each other again. Then it was just coffee, just friendship. By the time it became more—" She spread her hands helplessly. "The longer I waited, the harder it got to find the right moment." James laughed bitterly. "Well, the moment found us, didn't it?" Alexandra nodded, looking down at her hands. "For what it's worth, everything else was real. How I feel about you is real." "I don't even know who you are," James said, the anger in his voice giving way to sadness. "The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist." "She does," Alexandra insisted, standing up. "I'm not just my job title or my bank account, James. The person you know who loves old bookstores and can't stand cilantro and takes terrible photos but tries anyway. That's the real me. More real than the person in those magazine articles. James shook his head. How can I believe anything you say now? Because I love you, she said simply. I've never said that to anyone before. Not like this. For a brief moment, James wavered. There was such sincerity in her eyes, such vulnerability. But then he remembered the months of deception, the casual way she'd maintained her cover story, how easily the lies had come to her. I think you should go, he said finally. I need time to process all this. James, please, go, he repeated more firmly. If any part of what we had was real to you, you'll give me the space I'm asking for. Alexandra looked like she wanted to argue, but after a moment she nodded. She picked up her purse and walked to the door. With her hand on the knob, she turned back. For the record, she said quietly, meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years, maybe ever. I'm sorry I ruined it. After she left, James sat alone in his apartment for hours, replaying their relationship in his mind. Every conversation, every date, every intimate moment, had any of it been genuine? Or had he just been entertainment for a bored billionaire? The next morning, he called in sick to work for the first time in years. He couldn't face his students, couldn't pretend everything was normal when his world had been turned upside down. Instead, he spent the day researching Alexandra Chen, reading every article he could find about her. The woman the business world described bore little resemblance to the Alex he knew. Alexandra Chen was ruthless in the boardroom, a strategic genius who had built her company from the ground up. She was known for her privacy, rarely giving interviews and never discussing her personal life. There were photos of her at charity galas and industry events, always impeccably dressed and perfectly composed. By contrast, his Alex laughed too loud at bad jokes and stole fries from his plate and fell asleep during movies. She got excited about small things, a perfect cup of coffee, a used bookstore find, the first spring day warm enough for just a light jacket. Could they really be the same person? A week passed with no contact between them. James threw himself into his work, staying late at school to avoid going home to an apartment full of memories. His colleagues noticed his change in mood, but respected his privacy when he brushed off their concerns. Then came the invitation. An official-looking envelope delivered to the school office, addressed to Mr. James Rivera. Inside was an invitation to a gala fundraiser for educational initiatives, hosted by the newly established Chen Foundation for Educational Access. At the bottom was a handwritten note. No pressure. Just thought you might be interested in the cause. James's first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of him. That evening, he searched for information about the Chen Foundation. It was brand new, announced just days after their confrontation, with a mission to fund educational programs in underserved communities. The press release mentioned scholarships, technology resources, and teacher support, all things he'd talked about with Alex during their time. Together, she was using her billions to create exactly the kind of program he'd dreamed about. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Maybe she had been listening. Really listening. The night of the gala, James stood outside the venue for 20 minutes before gathering the courage to go in. He'd rented a tuxedo for the occasion, feeling out of place among the luxury cars pulling up to the entrance. Inside, the ballroom was filled with the city's elite, business leaders. Politicians, celebrities, all gathered to support education, or at least to be seen supporting it. James accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the crowd for Alexandra. He spotted her across the room, surrounded by a group of admirers. She looked every inch the powerful CEO in an elegant black dress, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. She was smiling, but James knew her well enough to see that it didn't reach her eyes. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded room. Her smile faltered for a moment, then returned, more genuine this time. She excused herself from her group and made her way toward him. "You came," she said when she reached him, maintaining a respectful distance. "I was curious," he admitted, "about all this." He gestured around the room. "Would you like a tour?" she offered. "See what your bus fare investment has grown into?" Despite himself, James smiled at the reference to their first meeting. "Lead the way, Miss Chen." She guided him through the event, explaining the foundation's initiatives, all clearly influenced by the conversations they'd had about education and opportunity. The scholarship program for first-generation college students, the technology grants for underfunded schools, the stipends for teachers who developed innovative curriculum. "You did all this in 2 weeks?" James asked, genuinely impressed. "When you're the boss, you can fast-track things that matter," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, I had good inspiration." As the evening progressed, James watched Alexandra in her element, commanding respect, articulating a clear vision, moving seamlessly between different groups. This was a side of her he'd never seen before, and yet he could still catch glimpses of his Alex in the way she tilted her head when listening intently, or the particular gesture she made when emphasizing a point. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Alexandra found him again. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet?" He nodded, and she led him to a small terrace overlooking the city. They stood side by side at the railing, reminiscent of their moment on the ferry months ago. "You created all this because of me?" he asked after a moment of silence. "Because of the things you care about," she corrected. "The things I came to care about too through you." She turned to face him. "I meant what I said, James. Meeting you changed something in me, made me remember what's important, beyond stock prices and market share." James studied her, face so familiar and yet now layered with this new identity he was still trying to reconcile. "I don't know where we go from here," he said honestly. "I'm still hurt that you lied for so long." "I know," she acknowledged. "And I'm sorry. I should have trusted you with the truth much sooner." "Why didn't you?" She considered the question carefully. "I was afraid," she finally admitted. "Afraid you'd see me differently. That you'd see the CEO, the billionaire, instead of just me. The way everyone else does," James realized. Alexandra nodded. "With you, I was just a person, not a position or a portfolio. I didn't want to lose that." James understood then what she'd been protecting. Not her secret, but their connection. The rare space where she could be herself without the weight of expectation and judgment that came with her name and position. "I still don't know if I can trust you," he said slowly, "but I miss you. The real you, whoever that is." A glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. "I'd like a chance to show you. Both sides of me. All of me. No more lies?" he asked. "Complete transparency," she promised. "Though fair warning, my life can be complicated. Security details, public scrutiny, board meetings that run until midnight." "Sounds exhausting," James said with a small smile. "It is," she agreed. "But it's also meaningful work. Like teaching in its way, just with a different classroom." They fell into silence again, the city lights twinkling around them like stars. "So where do we start?" James finally asked. Alexandra held out her hand, a gesture both formal and intimate. "Hi, I'm Alexandra Chen. My friends call me Alex. I run a tech company. I'm terrified of elevators, and I think I'm still in love with you." James looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment, before taking it in his own. "Nice to meet you, Alexandra Chen. I'm James Rivera. I teach history. I give bus fare to strangers, and I think I might still be in love with you too." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't even an ending at all, but rather a new beginning. One based on truth this time. They had a long way to go to rebuild trust, to find a way to bridge their different worlds. But as they stood hand in hand on that terrace, both finally seeing each other clearly, it felt like a step in the right direction. The invitation to the Chen Foundation's first annual gala had marked a turning point for James and Alexandra. They were starting over in a sense, but with the advantage of already knowing each other's hearts, if not all the details of each other's lives. Their first official date as James and Alexandra, not James and Alex the tech consultant, was both familiar and strange. They went to a small restaurant where Alexandra had made reservations under a different name. But this time she arrived with a discreet security detail who sat at a nearby table. "Is this what dating you is going to be like?" James asked, nodding toward the two men pretending not to watch them. "Being followed everywhere?" "Not everywhere," she assured him. "But public places, yes. I've made some decisions that weren't popular with certain competitors. And then there are the occasional overzealous fans or critics." James raised his eyebrows. "You have fans?" Alexandra laughed. "Hard to believe, I know. But apparently being a female CEO under 40 makes me some kind of role model." She shook her head. They'd be disappointed if they knew how many nights I eat cereal for dinner because I'm too tired to cook. Now that's the Alex I know, James said with a smile, reaching across the table to take her hand. The next few months were an exercise in compromise and patience as they navigated their vastly different worlds. James had to adjust to the public scrutiny that came with dating someone of Alexandra's status. Though they tried to keep their relationship private, it wasn't long before a photo of them appeared in a business magazine under the headline, Chentech CEO's Mystery Man. "I'm sorry," Alexandra said when she showed him the article. "This is what I was trying to avoid by not telling you who I was. The spotlight can be intense." James studied the grainy photo of them leaving a restaurant. "Do I at least look good?" His attempt at humor broke the tension, and Alexandra laughed. "Very handsome. The article speculates that you're either a foreign investor or a rival CEO. If only they knew I spend my days explaining the Civil War to teenagers who'd rather be on their phones," he said dryly. For her part, Alexandra was learning to adapt to James's much simpler lifestyle. She traded her designer clothes for jeans and sweaters when they spent time in his neighborhood, leaving her security detail a block away when they visited his favorite local spots. "Aren't you worried someone will recognize you?" he asked one Sunday as they browsed a farmer's market near his apartment. "Look around," she replied. "No one here is looking for the CEO of Chentech. Besides, you'd be amazed how invisible you become without the power suit and entourage." It was true. With her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing sunglasses and casual clothes, Alexandra blended in with the Brooklyn crowd. Only occasionally did someone do a double take, as if trying to place where they knew her from. Slowly, they began introducing each other to their respective circles. James was understandably nervous the first time Alexandra invited him to a small dinner party at her penthouse. "These are friends, not business associates," she assured him as they rode up in the private elevator. "People who knew me before Chentech, who don't care about my stock price." The gathering was intimate, just 3 other couples and Alexandra's younger brother Michael, who sized James up with obvious curiosity. "So you're the famous history teacher," Michael said when Alexandra was in the kitchen. "The one who gave my sister bus fare." "That would be me," James replied, wondering how much Alexandra had told her family about their unusual beginning. Michael grinned. "She needed that, you know. Someone who saw her as a person, not a corporation." He glanced toward the kitchen. "She's different since meeting you. Happier." By the end of the night, James had relaxed considerably. Alexandra's friends were warm and unpretentious, sharing stories about her college days and early career that revealed a side of her he was still getting to know. "They liked you," Alexandra said as they stood on her balcony later, overlooking the city. "Especially Nora. She said you're refreshingly normal." "I'll take that as a compliment," James laughed. "They're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He shrugged. "I don't know. More talk about mergers and acquisitions. Less talk about the time you got food poisoning in Thailand." Alexandra groaned. "I'm going to kill Nora for telling that story." James's turn came a few weeks later when he invited Alexandra to dinner with his parents, who were visiting from out of state. He told them about her, including who she really was, but had downplayed the extent of her wealth and status. "They're simple people," he explained as they drove to the restaurant. "Dad worked in a factory his whole life. Mom was a nurse. They're proud of what they've accomplished, but they might be a bit intimidated?" Alexandra suggested. "Wary," James corrected. "They want to make sure you're not just slumming it with the commoners." Despite his concerns, the dinner went surprisingly well. Alexandra charmed his parents with her genuine interest in their lives and her ability to make them forget she was one of the richest people in the country. "She's lovely," James's mother said when Alexandra excused herself to take an urgent call. "Not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" James asked, echoing his earlier conversation with Alexandra. "Someone more." His mother searched for the right word. "Untouchable." "But she's just a person, isn't she? A person with an unusual job." That was the key realization they were all coming to. Alexandra was neither just the powerful CEO, nor just the down-to-earth woman James had first fallen for. She was both, and learning to integrate those sides of herself was part of her own journey. The real test of their relationship came 6 months after their reconciliation. Chentech was launching a new educational platform, and Alexandra had been working 18-hour days for weeks. They had barely seen each other, communicating mostly through late-night texts and brief phone calls. "I miss you," James said during one such call, lying in bed in his Brooklyn apartment while Alexandra worked in her home office across the city. "I miss you too," she replied, the exhaustion clear in her voice. "This launch is just—" "I know," he assured her. "Your work is important." There was a pause on the line. "Do you mean that?" she asked quietly. "Of course I do," James said, surprised by the question. "It's just, most people in my life either resent my work or only care about my work. They don't understand both matter to me." James thought about this. "Your work is part of who you are," he said finally. "Just like teaching is part of who I am. I would never ask you to be less committed to something that matters to you." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank you for understanding." After the product launch, which was a huge success, Alexandra showed up at James's school at the end of the day, ignoring the curious stares of students who recognized her from news coverage of the launch. "What are you doing here?" James asked when he found her waiting outside his classroom. "Playing hooky," she replied with a tired smile. "I've delegated everything for the next 48 hours. I'm all yours." They spent the next 2 days in a bubble of their own making. Ordering takeout, watching classic movies James insisted she needed to see, talking for hours about everything and nothing. No security detail, no work calls, no distractions. On the second night, as they lay tangled together on James's couch, Alexandra propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I have a proposition for you," she said. "Sounds serious," James replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It is. I've been thinking about my life, about what matters." She took a deep breath. "I've decided to restructure some things at Chentech. Promote my COO to handle more of the day-to-day operations." James sat up straighter. "You're stepping back?" "Refocusing," she corrected. "The Chen Foundation needs a full-time director. Someone who understands education, who has a vision for how to really make a difference." She looked at him meaningfully. "I was hoping you might have some ideas about that. Are you offering me a job?" he asked, surprised. Alexandra laughed. "No, I'm asking for your expertise. The job of director is mine, at least part-time while I transition some of my Chentech responsibilities." She became more serious. "But I want to do this right, James. I want to build something meaningful, something that will actually help kids like the ones you teach every day. And where do I fit in this plan?" he asked. She took his hand. "Wherever you want to fit. As my educational advisor officially, as my partner in this venture, and in life unofficially." It was the closest they'd come to discussing a future together, a deliberate step toward intertwining their lives beyond dating. "What about my teaching?" James asked, though he was already intrigued by the possibilities. "Keep teaching," Alexandra said immediately. "That's what makes you who you are. But maybe cut back to part-time? The foundation could use someone who's still in the classroom. Who knows what teachers and students really need?" As she outlined her vision for the foundation, James could see how carefully she'd thought about this, how she was trying to create a path where both their passions could coexist and complement each other. "You've really been planning this, haven't you?" he said when she finished. "I plan everything," she admitted with a small smile. "It's an occupational hazard. But this is different." She squeezed his hand. "This is about us. Finding a way forward that honors both our worlds instead of forcing one of us to abandon theirs." The thoughtfulness of her proposal touched him deeply. This was Alexandra showing him who she truly was, a woman who built bridges between seemingly incompatible worlds, who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. "I think," he said slowly, "that the Chen Foundation would be lucky to have its founder's educational expertise. And I think I'd be honored to be part of it." Her face lit up. "Really?" "On one condition," he added. "Name it. We find time for normal life, too. Weekends off, vacations where you don't check email, movie nights where neither of us is thinking about work." Alexandra pretended to consider this. "Those are tough terms, Mr. Rivera. I'm a tough negotiator, Ms. Chen." She leaned forward to kiss him. "Deal." 1 year after their chance meeting at the bus stop, James and Alexandra stood together at the opening of the Chen Foundation's first learning center in James's school district. The center would provide after-school programming, technology resources, college preparation assistance, and a host of other services for students and families in the community. As Alexandra cut the ribbon and cameras flashed, James watched from the side, filled with pride. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with on that rainy day. Compassionate, determined, visionary, now using her considerable resources and influence to make a tangible difference in the lives of children who reminded him of himself at that age. Later, as they toured the facility together, Alexandra slipped her hand into his. "Happy?" she asked quietly. "Very," he replied. "You've built something amazing here." "We've built it," she corrected. "I had the resources, but you had the vision. It took both of us." She paused, looking around at the students already exploring the new computer lab. "This is what I was missing before, purpose beyond profit. You helped me find that again." As they continued their tour, James reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them here. A rainy day, a lost wallet, a simple act of kindness that had changed both their lives immeasurably. That evening, they had dinner at the same small Italian restaurant where they'd gone on one of their first dates. Only now Alexandra didn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't, and James didn't have to wonder about the parts of her life she kept hidden. "I have something for you," Alexandra said as they finished their meal. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. James's eyebrows shot up. "Is this what I think it is?" She laughed. "Not quite yet, though I'm not ruling it out for the future." She slid the box across the table. "Open it. Inside was a key." James looked at her questioningly. "It's to a place I bought," she explained. "In Brooklyn, not far from your apartment. It's nothing fancy, a brownstone I'm having renovated. I thought—" She suddenly seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought it could be ours. A middle ground between my world and yours, somewhere we both belong." James turned the key over in his hand, understanding the significance of what she was offering. Not just a shared space, but a shared life. One they would build together, taking the best parts of both their worlds, a home, he said softly. "If you want it to be," she replied, watching his face carefully. James reached across the table and took her hand. "What I want," he said, "is you. The real you, CEO Alexandra and bus stop Alex and every version in between." "That's good," she said with a smile that lit up her entire face, "because that's exactly who I am." As they walked home that night to his apartment, which would soon give way to their shared brownstone, they passed the bus stop where they'd first met. By unspoken agreement, they stopped for a moment, looking at the simple bench that had changed the course of both their lives. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" Alexandra asked, leaning against him in the cool evening air. James thought about it. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Maybe not as quickly or as dramatically, but some connections are just meant to happen." "The history teacher believes in fate?" she teased. "The history teacher believes that small moments can change everything," he corrected. "A single conversation, a simple kindness." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "One bus fare that turned out to be the best investment either of us ever made." Alexandra laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet street. "Speaking of investments, I should probably tell you about the education startup I just funded. They're developing a new history curriculum that I think you're going to love." As they continued walking, planning their shared future with each step, neither of them noticed the young woman at the bus stop, frantically searching through her purse for her lost fare. But somewhere, somehow, another story was beginning. Another small moment that would ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Because that's how life worked, James thought as he listened to Alexandra talk passionately about her latest project. The biggest changes often came disguised as the smallest moments, a rainy day, a missed wallet, and the simple human connection that reminded everyone, even a billionaire CEO, that what mattered most couldn't be measured in dollars or stock prices, but in the courage to be seen for who you truly are and loved not despite it, but because of it. I've expanded each part of your story into approximately 1,400-word sections, using simple English and a natural conversational tone. The narrative follows James and Alexandra's journey from their first meeting at the bus stop, through the development of their relationship, the revelation of Alexandra's true identity, their reconciliation, and finally building a life together that bridges their different worlds. Each section is written to be engaging and maintains the human-centric approach you requested, with relatable emotions and situations that avoid feeling AI-generated. I've also ensured the content is appropriate for YouTube policies with no violations. Is there any specific part you'd like me to adjust or any particular aspect of the story you'd like me to enhance further.